Now the goal that's been talked about probably more than any other. The scorer, Hughie Ferguson. The City supporters go wild with excitement.
Good ball to Rees. Rees crowded up and getting away with it. This is dangerous. Clark! Yes!
We are rededicating this morning the memorial to our founder, Bartley Wilson. It is right and fitting that we rededicate this memorial on the centenary of the club's foundation. For without the efforts of this man, Cardiff City Football Club would not have existed. Let us spend a few moments in silent prayer and thanksgiving for our club, its founder, and all who've been a part of it these last 100 years.
If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can dream and not make dreams your master. If you can think and not make thoughts your aim. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same.
The founder of Cardiff City AFC, Bart Wilson, R.I.P. And now he really can rest in peace. When Bart died in 1954, his headstone went missing because heavy rain forced the burial to be postponed for a day. After lying hidden for almost half a century, it's been found just a few yards from Bart's grave. And now the crucial part he played in the formation of Cardiff City has been officially recognised by the club in their centenary year. It all began with good old Bart down by the riverside. From Public Park to Ninian Park, won't you come along for the ride? In the summer of 1899, the boys were taking wickets, but when they started scoring goals, well, it was not just cricket. Bart Wilson was a commercial artist from Bristol who never lost sight of the big picture. He may have been disabled, but Bart Wilson had a dream. He was a man with a mission to start a football team. He may have been born with a club foot, but he never looked for pity. Bart spent all his working life just serving Cardiff City. Bluebirds, they're our team. Bluebirds, Bartley's dream. I've never been a regular supporter of the Bluebirds, but I do remember as a boy walking from my home in Rumney to Ninian Park, through the city centre, over Canton Bridge and past number 1 Coldstream Terrace in Riverside, Bart Wilson's home and the birthplace of Cardiff City. Riverside's cricketers, who played over there in Sophia Gardens, wanted to keep fit in the winter, so as their secretary, Bart called a meeting to discuss how they could do it. And when barely a dozen people turned up, Bart very nearly gave up. Bart had arrived in Cardiff with his pregnant wife Sarah in 1895. Apart from his work in the printing industry and his painting, Bart's main passion was sport. And he was disappointed by the response to his first attempt to establish a football section of Riverside Cricket Club. But Bart Wilson was nothing if not determined. And it was here, in the front room of his house, that another meeting decided to set up Riverside Football Club. And with Bart as the driving force, they undertook an incredible journey from the Cardiff District League to the Football League. Bart's ambitions were perfectly in keeping with the growing confidence of this burgeoning town at the turn of the century. As coal from the South Wales valleys was turning Cardiff into a capital city, Bart realised that this Welsh rugby stronghold could also support a first-class football team. Despite being on crutches, Bart ran the clubhouse down this lane here. He persuaded the football authorities to let them change their name from Riverside to Cardiff City Football Club, and just before they turned professional in 1910, he found them their new home. 90 years ago, this was all Leckwith Common, and Ninian Park was the old Cardiff Corporation rubbish tip. Bart saw the potential of the site and he persuaded the city councillors to lease the 5 acres of land for £60 a year. During the First World War, Cardiff City very nearly went under, but thanks to the efforts of pioneering players like Fred Keener, Jack Evans and Billy Hardy, they were elected to the Football League in 1920. The rest, as they say, is history. Throughout the roaring 20s, they became a football power. Pipped at the post for the championship, twice they reached Twin Towers. Ferguson's winner was a lucky strike, that has to be said. Let in by a Welshman, the Gunners they were dead. Bluebirds, they're our team. Bluebirds, Bartley's dream. In 1924, a missed penalty by Len Davis in their last match cost Cardiff the league title by 0.024 of a goal in the closest ever finish to a First Division or Premiership title race. In the following year, they lost 1-0 to Sheffield United in their first FA Cup final. But in 1927, they were back at Wembley to beat Arsenal by a single goal in the first final to be broadcast live by the BBC.
This time, Cardiff's team is determined to bring the FA Cup out of England for the first time. Great names like Len Davis, Parkinson, Nelson, Weston, Curtis Irving, and of course Billy Hardy, the greatest uncapped player in the game's long history. And now the goal that's been talked about probably more than any other. The scorer, Hughie Ferguson. The city supporters go wild with excitement, sentiment shared by Mr. David Lloyd George and his daughter Megan. And Fred Keener leads his team triumphantly to the Royal Box.
It seemed as if the whole city was waiting to greet them. From the railway station, they drove to a civic reception in Cathays Park, which was awash with well-wishers. Fred Keener was in his element as he proudly showed off the trophy to the crowd. It was seen as a victory for the whole of Wales. 4 days later, the cup-winning team travelled north to Merthyr to play an exhibition game against the local side. 8,000 people packed into Penydarren Park to see the cup. Cardiff were in for a shock, though. The Matters beat them 1-0. From then on, the Bluebirds went into freefall. The depression hit South Wales badly. Money was tight, and when City spent their Wembley winnings on improving Ninian Park rather than replacing their Wembley winners, the rot set in, and relegation followed relegation. When Cardiff's most successful manager, Fred Stewart, retired in 1933, Bart Wilson was given his big chance. He was 63 years old. Besides running the club office, he helped to choose the team. He went out scouting and signing new players. This is a man on crutches, don't forget. Whatever needed doing, Bart did it for almost the whole season. Eventually, though, the workload just became too much and he returned to work in the office. That year, Cardiff City were forced to apply for re-election. They'd finished bottom of the whole Football League. In the 30s they were struggling, City went down the pan, but a youthful Danny Absey then became a lifelong fan. As a doctor and a poet, he loves to watch and play. He's followed Cardiff's fortunes at home and away.
I was 10 years of age, and I think Bart Wilson was involved at that time, though of course I didn't know him. I just came along with my brother Leo, and it was the first game I ever saw, and I think it was 1-0 or was it 0-0? Whatever it was, I was hooked, and I've been going ever since. I've just found it total theatre, really, and as in the theatre, where you identify with characters in the theatre, you identify with the players who are wearing a blue shirt. In fact, I used some of their names in a novel, so I remember the names very well, like Keating and Collins and Postin. There used to be a song, you know, which went like this. It went, pint of beer, Woodbine and a match, a fourpenny halfpenny walking stick to see the football match. The ball was in the centre, the referee's whistle blew, and Pugh had his temper, and up the wing he flew. He passed the ball to Walton, who didn't know what to do. He passed the ball to Keating, and in the net it flew. Oh, yes, we can, we beat West Ham? No. Gillingham, what was the score? 2-0 no more. Play up the boys in blue. So there were songs, though in those days, of course, there used to be a band going all around this ground. And they had the signature tune of Happy Days Are Here Again, and we were bottom of Division 3.
Are here again, the skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again.
Despite the depression, die-hard supporters kept faith with their team as they trundled along near the bottom of Division 3 season after season. Off the field, things weren't going too well either. In 1937, the roof fell in on Cardiff City, quite literally, when the main grandstand was burnt to the ground. The fire was started by burglars who were looking for the takings from the previous day's FA Cup tie. By the time the fire was discovered, in the early hours of the following Monday morning, City's original stand had gone up in smoke, along with most of the players' boots. Tommy Force, later to become president of the Welsh FA, was a young amateur fullback at the time.
It was a disaster to us all because it was like a second home to us. Of course, they had to build temporary dressing rooms very quickly under the Canton stand. I was a lucky one, really, because I was the only one that had my boots. I'd take them home. So all the others had to play in new boots the following week, and of course that was very serious because you used to train in new boots. You wouldn't give up your old boots. You'd have them repaired and patched and all the rest of it. Because in those days, it's not like the boots today, where, you know, they're so supple. These were hard leather. I remember players that stand in the bath in hot water, soak them, do all sorts of things.
It wasn't until 1939, when the coal exporter Herbert Merritt finally won his battle to take over the club, that the Cardiff City revival began.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see.
Of course, Football League fixtures were suspended during the war, but Secretary-Manager Cyril Spears was able to keep the team going by developing emerging local talent. And by 1945, the Bluebirds were ready to fly again. When the war was over, another lad joined the throng. Peter Corrigan was hooked when his dad took him along to be a Fleet Street sports reporter. Later he departed with thanks to Cardiff City. It was them who got him started. Bluebirds, they're our team.
Well, it was just after the war, 1945 or 46, and everyone became excited because Moscow Dynamo were coming here. You could hardly get a ticket. My father managed to get one for himself and for me. I was only 10 or 11. And although my memories are very vague, I can remember the crestfallen atmosphere when Dynamo started ripping goals in one after another. But that was where the seeds were sown, I think, in the minds and hearts of so many, from little boys like me to old men who'd all just gone through a war where there wasn't much in the way of entertainment of any description. We didn't enjoy seeing the local team beaten. But of course, quite soon the local team were supreme, albeit in the 3rd Division South. And the beauty was that most of them were local boys. The way they gelled and the way they captured the imagination was quite remarkable. People like Fred Stansfield, the captain, and Dan Cannon in goal, and of course Stan Richards. There was a pop song called Open the Door, Richard. And of course the fans suddenly began to sing Open the Score, Richards. And Stan would usually respond. Open the door, Richard. But he scored 30 goals that season, which is still a club record, which is pretty remarkable when you think of it. Open the door. And for a kid like me, it was magic, of course. I'm sure it didn't happen like that, it just seemed to.
The success of the 1947 side was reported week by week by Dwyer Lewis, alias Citizen of the Pink Football Echo. His work in the press box sparked the imagination of young Corrigan as he stood at the Grange end.
This man had the job of all jobs. That feeling never left me, and to think that, one day I was the equivalent of Dwyer Lewis, a very vivid memory and a very vivid impact it has on me, as it did on many others.
Several members of that successful 1947 team were in the side which took Cardiff City back to the promised land 5 years later. Ken Hollyman, Alf Sherwood, Billy Baker and Jimmy Blair blended well with newcomers like Ken Chisholm, Wilf Grant and George Edwards, a Welsh winger signed from Birmingham City.
We had 3 games left, all here at Indian Park, where we hardly lost a match all season, but we had to win those 3 to get promotion. We beat Blackburn and Hull, and then it came down to the Leeds match. And, oh dear, the tension around Indian Park, and in the city of Cardiff, you know, was you could cut it with a knife. And I remember standing in the tunnel here with some of the Leeds players. We were very tense about this particular game against them, when one of their players said, "Oh, stop panicking, you're a far better team than we are, you're bound to win." And we felt he was saying, you know, that you want to win, it doesn't make any difference to us, so you're bound to win it. And indeed we did. 60,000 people nearly here, streaming on the pitch after the game, the first time in 20 years we'd been in the First Division.
So Bart Wilson, now the grand old man of Cardiff City, lived to see his beloved Bluebirds return to the top flight. 2 years later, he passed away at the age of 84. The 50s and early 60s were the yo-yo years. After the disappointment of their relegation in 1962, the green grass of Ninian Park was graced by the return of 2 Welsh legends. Joining from Newcastle, Golden Boy Ivor Allchurch, and John Charles, the gentle giant who arrived from Roma a year later. The pair helped City under new manager Jimmy Schooler to embark on their European adventure. When Royal came to Ninian, City played them off the park. Nigel Rees sent in a cross, which found big Brian Clark. Clarky still lives here, he's the West Country kid, who scored that great goal which beat the great Real Madrid. Bluebirds.
A fellow called Bobby Brown done his ligaments against Aston Villa on Boxing Day 1967. And Bobby Brown was playing up front with a young lad just started in Cardiff boy called John Toshak. So Jimmy Schooler rang up and wanted me to replace Bobby Brown. So the opportunity to come to Cardiff with all the wonderful trips of in Europe, no way was I going to say no.
City had begun flying the Welsh flag in Europe in 1964 when they played their first game in the Cup Winners' Cup. Their opponents, Esbjerg from Denmark, were beaten 1-0 by a Peter King goal.
Foul across King, and it's in the net. There's the first.
Only 8,000 witnessed Cardiff's debut, but for the best part of a decade, the crowds turned out on a number of wonderful floodlit European nights as City collected some notable scalps.
That same season, having beat Esbjerg, we went on to play Sporting Lisbon, who were then the holders of the European Cup Winners' Cup, and we actually defeated them out in Lisbon. I remember Derek Tapscott, he scored one of the goals there. People may describe it as a fluke. I think if Tappy was honest, he miscued. It crossed the keeper's head and into the net, and we won 2-1.
We had 1 minute of injury time.
4 years later, Cardiff reached the semi-final, where they met SV Hamburg. Brian Clark missed the game because he hadn't been signed in time. But as a playoff beckoned, he watched in horror from the stand as goalkeeper Bob Wilson made a rare mistake.
Oh, and here comes Hilbriggs. It's a goal! It's a goal! It is a goal, and Hamburg have won it! Hamburg have won it!
Meanwhile, Cardiff went close to promotion in 1968 and 69 as Clark and Toshak terrorised opposition defences.
And there's the terrible twins as they must be coming down in second division football. Clark and Toshak.
John and myself had formed quite a useful partnership in a good side. That season we were chugging along quite nicely, going really, really well. But there was all this talk of John moving on.
Head to Sharp now. Sharp to Bell. Bell clipping it hard across and there's... Oh yes! Perfectly good goal! Again we've got... There's Toshak. He might well, and that's the man who's giving him 3 goals this afternoon. Brian Clark, but Toshak with his 3rd goal of the afternoon.
In 1970, as the leading goal scorer in a team now in the quarter-finals of the European Cup Winners' Cup and looking likely to make it 3rd time lucky in the league, John Toshak was attracting a lot of attention.
Bang! He scored 3 goals, I think, against Queen's Park Rangers. And the following Monday or Tuesday, we picked the paper up and John had signed for Liverpool.
The sale netted Cardiff a then record £110,000. Jimmy Schooler had wanted to buy Alan Warboys from Sheffield Wednesday, but the board's refusal to extend their overdraft before selling Toshak meant that the price for Warboys went up during a crucial delay. In the 6 weeks between Toshak's departure and Warboys' debut, 8 valuable points were dropped, and once again the club missed out on promotion. Some say that in selling Toshak, Cardiff City sold their ambition too.
Maybe that was the case, I really don't know. But what I do know is, having talked to Jimmy Schooler years after he finished in management here, I remember Jimmy saying to me that he had gone to the board at one stage when we were lying second or third and asking the board for £100,000. A lot of money in those days, but that was the money that could have purchased us 3 players, which would have guaranteed our progress into the First Division. But he was refused that money by the board. So, you know, under those circumstances, I think maybe the club could have been accused of lacking ambition.
A crowd of around 50,000, the biggest for many a year, welcomes Cardiff City's greatest fixture ever. And it's Real Madrid to kick off in this game.
That season was saved by 1 match, and indeed by 1 goal.
Gary Bell. Good play by Woodruff. Good ball to Rees. Rees crowded up, but getting away with it. This is dangerous. Clark! Yes!
There was 50,000 people at Ninian Park that night, and it was just a magic atmosphere. Because that night we were the kings of Europe. We'd beaten the great Real Madrid. It's the goal that a lot of people remember, and I will always remember. But I would gladly have swapped that goal for a goal which would have took Cardiff City into the First Division. That really would have meant more than the glory goal against Real Madrid.
Phil Dwyer, he was special, a solid Grange down lad. He gave it 13 long-hard years, some good but mostly bad. He gave his blood for City, with passion and with fire. He played the most games for the club, did faithful old Phil Dwyer. Bluebirds.
Along with a few friends, when money was tight in those days, we couldn't afford the admission fee to get in to watch Cardiff City. So we came up and put a railway sleeper at the back of the wall, climbed up the railway sleeper over the wall and into the ground. And then we used to just mingle with the crowd.
From watching his heroes for free, Phil Dwyer found himself playing alongside them when he joined the Cardiff City ground staff as a 16-year-old in 1969.
When I was asked to come and join the club, obviously I jumped at the chance. It was every schoolboy's dream, really.
In the early days, the both of us were on the ground staff here, and we would meet each other many times in practice games. But I was in the combination in them days, and we'd play the likes of Tottenham's and Chelsea's and Arsenal's with people like Eddie McCready and Joe Kinnear, Ron Harris at Chelsea, all great defenders in their own right. But when I used to play against Phil in practice games here, I always found him as difficult as anybody I played against.
Phil Dwyer's was always the first name on the team sheet, no matter who was Cardiff City's manager, and he played under 8 of them in all. He always gave 100%, especially during derby matches against Swansea City. In December 1980, as John Toshak's team were heading for Division 1, City found themselves in a spot of trouble at Ninian Park.
We were 3-2 down with a few minutes to play, and we had a free kick around about 35 yards out. And John Buchanan said, "I'm going to hit it." And everybody said, "You know, don't be so silly." And the next thing we knew, it was settled in the back of the net. 3-3, and it made the world for the supporters that day.
During Phil's time at Ninian Park, City were normally fighting against relegation, but he did play in 2 promotion teams. One managed by Jimmy Andrews in 1976, and the other 7 years later when Len Ashurst was in charge. But Phil almost didn't make it.
At the beginning of the season, I had an operation on my knee, and I was in the Pupa Hospital, and I picked up the local paper to find out that along with 4 or 5 others, I'd be given a free transfer. I was not amused by this, and obviously I went in to see Len afterwards, and he said that because of my injury, I had to prove to him that I was worthy of a first-team place.
Something he duly did, to become the rock on which the 1983 promotion-winning defence was built. The record books show that Phil Dwyer made 471 league appearances for Cardiff City before retiring to become a policeman.
Obviously, I'm very proud being a local lad as well, playing all those games. I can't see it being beaten. I can't see many players staying loyal to one club for that amount of time.
Sue Goodfriend was a real good friend to thousands of fans. She organised the coaches which travelled through the land. Most women in her time were told, ladies, take a back seat. But now they're in the boardroom, a quite remarkable feat. Bluebirds.
I used to come down here as a kid. My dad brought me when I was a very young kid, maybe 6 or 7 was the first time I came to a game. And I was sort of entranced by the sights and the smells and the floodlights and so on. My sister followed in my footsteps. We used to come to games whenever we could. So right from the time I was a child, I was involved in football, but obviously you don't really understand football at that time.
And to be honest, football was still seen as a man's game. Sue and her sister Sandra became involved with the Cardiff City Supporters Club as teenagers when they stood on the Bob Bank one Saturday afternoon.
They used to collect man of the match nominations after each game. We found it very difficult one day to give our man of the match nomination, which seemed extremely important at the age of about 16 or something. And I went and criticised them and said that it was a shambles and, you know, people weren't getting a fair view of who the man of the match was, etc. And they said, well, if you think you can do better, come and join us. So our first job became to walk around the Bob Bank at the end of the game asking people who they thought their man of the match had been. I think they thought it was a bit of a novelty at that time as well to have 2 girls doing that.
Sue's organisational skills helped her become secretary of the Supporters Club, a job which mainly involved sorting out the travel arrangements for away matches. The growing problem of hooliganism was creating huge headaches for both genuine supporters like Sue, who had to enforce drink restrictions on coaches which were sometimes damaged by rival fans, and for Cardiff City.
The challenges of the 80s were tremendous. I mean, Cardiff City, like every other football league club, had to adjust to the safety of sports ground problems. At Cardiff, there was a specific problem with football hooligans because it was very bad here, and that destroyed a lot of the club, in my opinion. And I'd like to talk to some of the supporters, those so-called supporters now, who behaved in that fashion back in 1980 because they did untold damage, not only to attendances, but to the lack of sponsorship, the lack of commercial revenue, all the rest of it. And so between 80 and 1988, it was a very difficult time.
It was also a difficult time for women. Football was not yet a family-friendly game, and men seemed reluctant to share their sport.
People would say, well, look, this is a man's game. If you don't like it, you know what you can do. If people would swear in front of you and you'd object to it, it would be, you better move if you don't like it. That kind of attitude which said, this is ours and you're not having it, that was around. As a woman, I had to prove myself. I had to show that I was at least twice as knowledgeable as everybody else around me. I did understand the laws of the game. I wasn't there just to ogle at the players' legs. I did know a centre forward from a full-back. I knew what an overlapping full-back was, etc., etc. And I had to always be very vocal about that. I had to prove that I was a supporter in a way that no man ever seemed to have to do.
Sue eventually gave up running the Supporters Club and swapped a spot on the Bob Bank for a seat in the grandstand. As the new millennium approaches, things have certainly changed for the better. More women are watching football than ever before, with a few even helping to run the game.
In the last 5 or 10 years, we've had obvious examples. Karen Brady was perhaps the most high profile of those examples at Birmingham City. You've got Delia Smith in the Boardroom, and we've had our own female chief executive in Joan Hill, who did a really good job in raising the profile of the club, and at the same time managed to raise the profile of women in football, I think.
As chairman or director, 17 years he spent. Tony Clemo loved the game, but all his money went. When his travel business faltered, the time came to decide. He had to bite on the bullet, and Cardiff City survived.
Well, I got involved
about 1975, and it was really through an accident rather than intention. Once you got involved, I mean, the kudos was exceptionally pleasant. Because there were 11 of us, there wasn't a lot of responsibility thrust on each one. And I'll be quite honest with you, I think for the first 3 or 4 years, I didn't know where the toilet was in Cardiff City. I mean, the management and the manager at the time, I mean, they just took the directors apart. I mean, they just got what they wanted. The board were too frightened or didn't really know enough about it to say no. And they just kept on saying yes, 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 and that's how it went. And then, of course, the first year, basically, that we were there, got promotion, and everybody thought, well, this is a piece of cake. After that 1976 promotion year, City struggled for most of Tony Clemo's time on the board. And the Cardiff travel agent gradually began to realise that football is different to any other type of business. A business to me is where you make calculated risks and you say, well, if I do A, B, C and D, the following should happen. If it doesn't happen, it won't be far off what's happening. In sport, different ballgame. You know, you're reliant on 11 guys on the park. If they perform, fantastic. If they don't perform, you're in the SH1T. Tony Clemo took over the club in 1986, and 2 years later, under manager Frank Burrows, City achieved a promotion and Welsh Cup double. The manager later left because of what he thought was a lack of ambition. He then worked at Portsmouth, Swansea and West Ham before returning to Ninian Park last year. Worse was to come for the chairman. A general slump in the holiday business in the late 80s meant his company, Red Dragon Travel, needed to call in the money it had loaned to Cardiff City to keep the club going. It was a heck of a struggle from then on, and we were really living hand to mouth for the next 2 years. And the banks, of course, were putting pressure on all round, which didn't help matters. We got to a stage in the end that it was basically Red Dragon or Cardiff City. Again, possibly, here's where a hard-nosed businessman suddenly becomes a bit stupid. And as it was, Cardiff City survived and Red Dragon didn't. Forced to sell out to the even harder-nosed businessman Rick Wright, Tony Clemo could only watch as City again did the double in 1993. This time, the Third Division Championship was followed by a Welsh Cup win over Rhyl at Cardiff Arms Park. Wright then lost interest in football, sold the club to Samesh Kumar and disappeared down under. But the former chairman has no regrets about putting the football club before his business. One could look back at it now and say, well, I made the wrong decision, but at the end of the day, Cardiff City is part of Cardiff. Cardiff City is an institution in its own right in South Wales, and one's love of the club and of what it stands for, I suppose that swayed the heart more than the hard-headed businessman who sort of said, cut it off, forget about it, and get on with, other things. So there we go. One of soccer's sayings is, you never should go back. But manager Frank Burrows made history doing just that. In 2 different decades with commitment and devotion, he dragged them up by the bootstraps and twice they won promotion.
I looked in the mirror one day and I was 54. Didn't look it, I didn't think so, but I was 54 and I wanted to manage again. When the opportunity to come back to Cardiff came about, then I jumped at it. I've got a house in South Wales and I know what this club's capable of, and I thought I'll give it one more go. And I came back here and I said to everybody I'd do it, give me 2 years, put up with me for 2 years, tolerate my failures and disappointments, because at the end of 2 years, if I don't give you joy and happiness, i.e. a winning team, then I won't be here. And luckily for me, and luckily for Cardiff City fans, it's come with the very first year, and that's all credit to the players, and the fans have got a winning team.
That team topped the table for much of last season. Mark Delaney's goal, as Chester were hit for 6 in the FA Cup, one of the highlights of a wonderful 9 months. City picked up the point they needed in their final home league match against Scunthorpe to make sure of a place in Division 2, and Frank Burrows became the only Cardiff manager to win promotion during 2 separate spells at Ninian Park.
This second time around, I had a chance to make a lot of changes, and I had the chance to bring my players in, or different players in, and I then started working and shaping them and trying to get a system that suited the players, a playing system that they would enjoy, that they would look forward to coming in to work, because that's important, you see.
The training's very good. He's brought techniques from West Ham. I think he's been abroad to see different clubs, how they work. And basically the club is run on a very professional basis, as it should be.
I've got to convey to my players that I want to go forward and I want the club to go forward. I've got to get the message to the fans, and hopefully at the end of this season we stay in Division 2 and are looking, and there's signs that we're going upwards and onwards to Division 1.
He's very encouraging. He looks after the players. Me personally, he's encouraged me to play football.
Come on, don't walk. Tell me walk when you're my age.
He's a manager that you know you want to play for.
And during the summer, more players have shown they want to play for Frank Burrows, as the board have backed his judgment. Matt Brazy has arrived from First Division Fulham, Willie Boland from Premiership side Coventry, Russell Perrott has joined from another Division 1 team, Portsmouth, while Jamie Hughes was signed from Connah's-Quay Nomads in the League of Wales. The surprise resignation of chairman Samesh Kumar has created some boardroom friction, as the club relies on a group of individuals rather than one major shareholder. The directors, all City supporters, are determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past when the club failed to build on promotion. They have a new chairman, Cardiff-born and bred Steve Borley, and a new shirt sponsor, at the start of what they hope will be a new era for Cardiff City.
We have all been inspired as we've read the story of Bartley Wilson, this disabled individual who had an unbelievable determination to create a football club in the city of Cardiff. And I believe part of his vision was to see the football club as a club that was owned not by one individual or by a successful business or even by a series of successful business people, but by the people of Cardiff, the people of South Wales. And it's interesting that as we look at the era from about 1910 through to the golden age of Cardiff City in the 1920s, the composition of the board of directors was very similar to the composition of the board of directors that we have now. And if that was a recipe for success then, I see no reason why it can't be a recipe for success now.
So that's the story of Cardiff City, the Bluebirds, as they celebrate their centenary on the eve of the 21st century. The new stadium to mark the millennium is almost ready, and many of us hope that maybe one day they'll play there as part of football's elite. Cardiff City in the Premiership? Dream on. But there again, isn't that exactly what Bad Wilson did 100 years ago? Bluebirds, they're our team. Bluebirds, Bartley's dream.
If I had an opportunity of going to a very good film or watching Cardiff City play, I'd go and watch Cardiff City play.
Within the foreseeable future, within, say, 10 years, you could establish a first-rate European team in Cardiff.
If I win the lottery, I'll inject 2 or 3 million and go on the board and see if we can't go places.
It's a Cardiff thing. It's Cardiff business, it's Cardiff people, it's Cardiff supporters.
I can't imagine my life without Cardiff and without football.
Bluebirds, they're our team. Bluebirds, Bartley's dream.